Hey everyone, welcome to week 14, day 5. This is our last day on our black and white two color gouache week. So we've done awesome attempts at trying to reinterpret color. The purpose of this is not to be sort of realist. We're not going to get a naturalist translation because we don't know what those colors look like. So we can actually have fun while we're doing these and interpret it in as many expressive ways as we want. So I did yesterday a painting of Edwin Dickinson, which I absolutely adore. I adore him as a person, as an artist, as a human being, his paintings, everything. Every single bit of his life I absolutely love, I adore. And today, one of the biggest painters ever. It's going to be a little tough, but we'll see how we do. Okay, let's get started. Now for today's last painting, this Friday painting, I'm going to talk about one of the biggest painters in art history. And I've talked about artists that are close to my heart. I've talked about Boznanska, I've talked about Bonnard, I've talked about Camille Claudel. Yesterday, we referenced my favorite American painter, whose painting, The Cello Player, is probably one of my top 10 paintings ever, Edwin Dickinson. And today, this is a tough one because I was thinking I was going to say my favorite Spanish painter of all time. But, oh my God, that's almost an impossible task to try and say who the biggest Spanish painter of all time was. I'm guessing that if you're very objective about it, if you think about the impact that this painter has had through history, it would have to be Velázquez, because he can still be referenced today, even in contemporary painting. Things that he did in the Baroque, in the 17th century, were so ahead of his time. Just the way he understood painting, the simplicity, the synthesis of understanding, of being able to comprehend nature through paint is just unmatched. It's just absolutely unmatched. That's why people that have been as big as him, painters as big as him, have always considered him, for example, Sargent, always considered him the best painter ever. And I think the testament to how huge Velázquez was as a mind, as an artistic mind, is that when you look at his paintings, they just look simple. They look like somebody who's far more intelligent than you are is explaining to you something that's incredibly complex in very simple terms, and you understand it. Whenever I see a body, a portrait painted by Velázquez, it is deceptively simple. I go out of the museum just thinking, okay, I think I get it. I think I understand how to do this. And then I try to tackle the same problem, and I can't. It feels overwhelming. It feels like this humongous wave is crashing on my face while he was able to surf on top of it just absolutely gracefully. I was probably going to get ahead of myself, but yeah, probably, objectively, Velázquez is the biggest, most important Spanish painter of all time. You could argue he's probably the most important painter of all time. But, and this is me also accepting that I have a fascination, an almost adoration for Fortuny. And if I would have to go with my gut, I would probably be Fortuny's team. And which is kind of sad because the painter that we're painting today, Joaquín Sorolla, was actually somewhat critical of Fortuny. He was not impressed by his work. And I don't know, I've tried to read about why he would have formed that impression on his work, because it's very hard to say that these two people, both Fortuny and Sorolla, are not just geniuses. They're not just, a pair of the most virtuoso painters ever. So I think it probably had to do with ego and more superficial things that they thought about color, because that's what I read, that maybe Sorolla had his own philosophy about color. And during the late 19th century, early 20th, like I've mentioned before, a lot of color theory, a lot of color understanding was very esoteric. It was very almost intangible. So I'm guessing the discussions that they would have were really not too relevant in the sense of fundamentally what was wrong or right about a painting. It probably just had to do with what was fashionable at the time, if you want to kind of understand it that way. But it's very sad. It's almost like I have these two amazing painters that I want them to behave and act as friends, and it's pretty strange to see that they could be critical of each other. But Joaquín Sorolla has this marriage of different philosophies of paint that I think meet in a place that is so unavoidably attractive and appealing to a painter like myself and to hundreds of thousands or millions of other painters in the world that do like all the impressionist color theories that were coming from Europe at the time, but also wanted the previous philosophy of the academy where there was discipline. So you almost had this perfect match in Sorolla where he was able to convey all this knowledge that he had about all these traditional qualities that were part of an academic training, but he was able to do it, and he was able to communicate it through just the most fresh, energetic, gestural manner ever. And one of the things that I'm most attracted by Sorolla's story is something that is not quite as apparent as his paintings, because when you look at his paintings, I mean, people will always just leave stating that they have witnessed one of the most incredible painters at representing light, at representing sunlight, beaming sunlight, and the liveliness of light meeting earth meeting sea, because his beach scenes are unmatched, they're unparalleled. I think there can be generations from now on trying to paint at the beach, and they'll never get close to what Sorolla was able to capture. He was that much of an extraordinary painter. There was nobody like him, and I am positive that for many years we will not have a talent like his on this earth. But one of the things that attracts me most about his life is one thing I learned from reading the correspondence that he kept with his wife, something that appeared to me as quite anecdotal at the beginning, and then I realized something. And this is kind of cool. Sorolla had gotten a scholarship to study in Rome, and after he had studied in Rome in the late 1800s, he moved back to Spain, but both him and his wife were from Valencia. But he didn't move back to Valencia. He moved back to Madrid, and they were trying to kind of get his career going, and both of them knew that they would have to be in the capital for that to happen. So a lot of the early Sorollas are paintings that, you know, many people dismiss in the sense not to say that they weren't extraordinary paintings, but they didn't have the impact that the latter paintings did when he started painting fishermen and the boats and just the sunlight on the beaches of Valencia. And I was always curious why the transition from Madrid to Valencia back again to paint. And what you can tell from the letters, every time this is noted, it's almost said in passing, and it has to do with his children being born. So the first child that was born was his daughter, Maria Clotilde. She got sick because it was kind of normal back in the 1900s, that early 1900s, that kids would have respiratory diseases, the flu. And one of the things that they would do when they would get sick was to go to the beach. People here in Colombia still do that, especially here in Bogota. We live at a very high altitude, and when people get sick, they try to go to sea level and they try to go to the beach, and you get more oxygen, and that's amazing for your body. So that's exactly what they did in the 1900s. When his daughter was born, she was sick. So what Clotilde did was take her daughter back to her parents' house in Valencia, while Sorolla was working in Madrid. And every time he would go to Valencia to visit to see how they were doing, he would paint. And he would paint all these beach scenes. And that to me was just fascinating. It was almost strange for me to understand that the painting that was done in Valencia was just almost like a byproduct of him visiting his wife and his daughter. And eventually the same thing happened with his son. He was born, and again Clotilde moved to Valencia, and Sorolla went back and forth from Madrid to Valencia. So all this time that he was painting there, it wasn't a choice. It wasn't because he was chasing sunlight. It wasn't because he was trying to capture something conceptual about light. It wasn't because he had been to Paris in the late 1890s and he had brought back all the French color theories and he wanted to put them to use. No, no. It's because his kids were sick and his wife wanted to move back home so that they would be healthy. That's that's the reason why he was there. He wasn't there just chasing something, just trying to look for something strange to paint. What is going to give identity to my paintings? No, because while he was in Madrid, I mean, he did incredible paintings. But it was only until the 1890s he kept moving back and forth that he was able to understand that he could paint the manners that were customary in Valencia, in Valencia's culture. And that's how we got to see this unbound master of understanding light and understanding nature and this gift of painting. I'd like to think of these things in a very almost sarcastic manner and say, could you imagine like if his kids were never sick? If he was living in Madrid nowadays, you don't move because your kids maybe have a runny nose or developing a cold. You just take them to the pediatrician and you're fine. They get some shot and that's it. But they couldn't do that like 120 years ago. They had to trust nature and they had to go where there was oxygen and sunlight and air, fresh air. And if it wasn't for that, he would have never painted the beach. He would have never painted sunlight, which is crazy to me, which is absolutely crazy. I'm sure people could argue, no, that would have found its way. But I don't want to believe those things. And the reason I don't want to believe those things is because I kind of think that you can't separate art from life. I think it's a huge mistake when you do. I think it's weird. This yearning to be somewhere else with our work, to think that it can honestly portray and speak about a reality that is not the one that we live in. I think it's very, very strange. Now, granted, I don't want to say that art is limited to the confines of your life. You can speak about whatever you want with your artwork. That is so very true. But I think the only way to achieve honesty through artwork is when you speak about the things that accompany your life, when you speak about the moment-to-moment parts of your life. And that's what Sorolla did. He wasn't looking for this. He was just back home. But home also meant Valencia was not the city where everything was happening in Spain in the 1900s. It was Madrid. That was the capital. You had to be there if you wanted to be a big artist. So he had to go back to his town. And that's where the magic happened. That's where the most fascinating things happened. And I always tell people that saying that art has to do more about life than it has to do about art. I think that that's true. It is entirely true. And a lot of times we spend so much time, I mean, it could be years, sometimes decades, just thinking that we have to look outward and outward and outward, and we have to travel so far from home to try and find ourselves, when in reality, it's just right there. It's always been there. It's just that we don't want to see it. We don't want to think of it as something that has the dignity to become artwork, to become painting. We are blind. And I think it's just a small story in every single artist's story where life and art are completely intertwined and you can't separate the two of them. And that to me is incredible. That's part of the project that we're doing now with Danny is almost the accepting of the fact that a project can be born in the little tiny place that we share, and it can speak about that little tiny place and the few relationships that we have with family and friends and the people that are dear to us, and the few spaces that we've inhabited. that's our history. It's a small, small history, but we can actually speak about that smallness and not be ashamed. Because, like I've always said, you can find the universe hidden behind the smallest of things. And I think this can't be any more true than this episode in Sorolla's life, where, think about it, if he had had healthy kids, we wouldn't have had the chance to see one of the most intelligent painters ever tackle sunlight in the most masterful way possible. It's just such a small variable when you think about it. Like, everything sort of hangs in these tiny, tiny little moments, the smallest of variables. That's just fascinating to me. That just reminds me that, you have to keep your eyes open. You really have to keep your mind open, your eyes open, because the opportunities are always there. They're always there. It's just that we don't know how to spot them as easily as we would if we just gave in and said, life brought me here. Let's make the best of it. That was it for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Next week, we'll have a new theme. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep painting with gouache. And one of the reasons I'm not sure I'm going to be painting with gouache is because I'm running out of my paints. And it's not so easy at this quarantine moment to get some gouache. I could probably order them through Amazon, but it would take them weeks to get here. So we're probably going to go back to oil paints. Again, life getting in the way, but you have to roll with it. So next week, new theme. We'll be here. I hope you guys give us a chance to keep you company. So thank you, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.